Hi guys, and welcome to this video. In this video, I'm going to show you how to deploy an API onto Linode. So we're going to be using Django and the Django Rest Framework to build an API, and I'm going to show you how to deploy that API onto Linode. So Linode offers a 60-day $100 credit, and you can use that to follow along with this tutorial. So there will be a link in the description below where you can easily sign up to Linode and get the credit for free. So without wasting any time, once you sign up, let's get straight into this video. Now for this video, we're going to be using the Django Rest Framework to build our APIs. So for us to be able to use this Django Rest Framework, we need to first install the Python library. So we need to make sure that we have Django and the Django Rest Framework installed. So Django is what we're going to be using to build our web application, and the Django Rest Framework is what we're going to be using to build APIs on our web application. So let's get straight into the computer and let's do this. So I'm right here on my terminal on my Mac. If you're on a Windows, just open your command prompt. And what I'm going to do is to type pip3 install Django and Django Rest Framework. Now this is going to make sure I have Django installed, and it's going to install Django Rest Framework for me if I don't have it. So it says requirements already satisfied for Django, but for Django Rest Framework it started downloading it and it has successfully installed that. Now let's clear this up so it's just going to be a little bit neat. Now that we have that, the first thing we want to do is to create a new Django project. So I'm going to go into my documents. And in my document, I'm going to make a new directory, and I'm just going to name this directory API project. And I'm going to cd into that API project. And now it should be blank. I'm going to clear that again. And what I'm just going to do, I'm going to actually make this a little bit larger. I'm going to say Django admin start project, and I'm just going to name this something like business API. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a basic API that just shows, that returns the name of a business or of a company, and it's, says the amount of employees that works under that company. So I'm just going to name it business API. Now what I'm going to do is to cd into business API. Now that I am in the business API, if I press ls, you can see that I am in a new Django project has been created. So I'm going to say clear, just to have a clean terminal. And now that I have that created, before I go straight into VSCode, I want to create a new Django app. So I'm going to create one app under this. I'm going to say python3 manage.py. And I'm just going to say start app, and I'm going to name it API. So I could just name it that. And if I press ls now, I have a new project, a new app named API. Now that I have created all of this, I could move into VSCode right here. And in VSCode, I'm just going to import. So I'm going to open a folder, and I'm going to open the folder that I just created. I'm going to go into document, API project, and business API. Now this is going to open this Django project for me right here in my VS Code. So I'm going to quit this real quick. Good. So now everything is working, and you can see that I have this basic Django project. So once again, you should have a basic knowledge of Django to be able to follow along with this tutorial. So what I'm going to do now is to make sure that we actually have some database to play with. So I'm going to create a new database, and I'm going to input some values into that database. And once we have those values, we're then going to create an API for our application. And that API is going to be a very basic API that just returns, some values from our database. And those values are going to be names of businesses and the amount of employees that works for them. So let's do that. The first thing I want to do is I want to create a managed Postgres database in Linode. So you could use various ways to create your database. You could use SQLite, you could use whatever you want to use. You could use Postgres, MySQL, but for this video I want to use Postgres. And instead of downloading Postgres, creating all of that from scratch, I'm just going to go into Linode and create a managed Postgres database. Now let's do that. Before we do that, let's make sure our project is running. So we're just going to open up a new terminal. I'm going to say new terminal. I'm going to say python3 manage.py run server. Now if you don't know, this is going to make sure that it's going to run your project and it's going to show you if everything has been successful. I'm going to copy this link. I'm going to come in here into my browser. So right here, I already have Linode opened, but let me just open this up. Good, you can see it says the install worked successfully. So now we know that our Django project is running successfully. Now that we know we have that, the next thing I want to do is to come into Linode. So you should go into cloud.linode.com and it's going to ask you to create a new account if you don't. There will be a link in the description where you can easily create a new account and get $100 free credit to be able to play around with this. And once you've logged in, it's going to take you to this dashboard right here. What you want to do is to click on create and you want to come into database. So you want to create a new database. As I said, we're going to be creating a Postgres database. I'm going to name this business API. That's what I'm going to give it. And now it wants us to select our database engine. You could use any one you want, to be honest, but what I'm just going to use is Postgres. You could use MySQL. You could use Postgres. I'm going to click on Postgres. That's that version 14.4. It's going to tell you to select a region. So it's advisable to select the region closest to you. So I'm going to select London, UK. And it's going to tell you to pick a plan. So for this, I'm just going to pick the most basic plan. And depending on whatever type of application you're building, that's what you're going to use to determine what plan you're going to choose. But for this application, I'm going to pick the dedicated 4 gig. And set the number of nodes. It recommends us to use 3 nodes. And this is because, as you can see here, it says it avoids downtime during upgrades and maintenance if you have 3 nodes. So it says high availability and it recommends that. So we're going to use this. And one more thing, it adds access control. So the reason why it asks us for our IP address is so that only my computer can be able to, access this particular database that we're creating. So, we don't just get anybody adding data to our database or being able to manipulate our database. So what I'm going to do is you can just go into Google and type my IP address. And it's going to bring up your IP address. You just need to copy that with that tab. You're going to come back in here, paste your IP address and click on create database cluster. Now it's going to say provisioning and it's going to take a while to provision what it needs. So what we can do is that as that is provisioning, we can just move forward with setting up the Django Rest Framework. So I'm going to show you what we're going to do. This is going to take a couple of minutes to finish, to provision and for everything to be set up. And while that is while that is running, I'm just going to go back into my VSCode. I'm going to quit this real quick. And what I want to do is that I want to come in here now and use Django Rest Framework to create an API. So as I said, we are going to create a database, add some data, then create an API for that database. But what we can do, as this is creating this database, I can show you how to integrate Django Rest Framework into your application. Then we are going to, add some values into our Postgres database. I'm going to show you how to connect that. And then I'm going to show you how to use the Django Rest Framework to create an API for that particular database or for your project in general. So let's do that. Now, the first thing that we want to do is to come in here. And we want to come into business API. I want to go into settings. Now in settings, the thing that we want to do is to add REST framework part of installed apps. So I'm going to come into installed apps. I'm going to add REST _ framework. So this is just the step in configuring. And I also want to add the app I created, which is called API. Just want to add that part of the apps. And I'm going to save this. So now that I have this, the next thing that I want to do is to create a very basic API view. So for us to create a very basic API view, what we actually need to do is to go into our URLs. So the first thing that I want to do is to make sure, actually in our API right here, we want to create a new urls.py file first of all. Now, the reason why we're creating a urls.py file is because we need a urls.py file to show different configurations to show different URLs in our project in general. So Django automatically creates a url.py file for our project, but it doesn't do that for our app. So we need to make sure that we have a urls.py file for our app, and this is how we are going to do that. So the next thing that we want to do is to actually come into here. So we want to come into urls.py and we want to create a view. So for us to create this view, we're going to come into the views.py And we actually want to say from, we want to import from REST framework. We want to import from views. Import, what we want to do is to import API view. So this is so that we can create a Django view, but an API view. And we also want to import response. So we want to import from REST framework.response, import response. Now we're going to use this to create a new, Django view, but we're going to create a class-based view. So I'm going to say class, and I'm just going to name this home view. And this is going to take from the API view which we imported. And for now, let's pass. So we're going to come back to this when we have our database created. So now that we have this, the next thing we want to do is to go to our urls.py in this particular file. And we want to import from django.urls, import path. So this is going to allow us to create new URLs path in our project. And I'm just going to say URL patterns equals a list, and then we're going to say path. So we're taking from the path that we imported, and I'm going to leave it blank. So when I leave it blank, this means I'm trying to create a new URL for my home page. And when I mean home page, for example, if I have a site named linode.com, linode.com is the home page. If I want to create a page for login, then linode.com/login, that's a different page. So that means I'm going to come in here and write login. But since it's the home page, I'm going to leave it blank. So now what I'm going to do is to say that I want to take this from, I want to import this view in here. So this home view that we created, I want to import it. So I'm going to say from .views import home view. And what I'm doing, I'm just importing this home view from here. And I'm going to say when a user tries to go to the home page, render this home view. So whatever is being done in this home view is what you should render. And that is what we're going to do now in this section. So what I'm going to do is to say home view dot as underscore view. Now this is going to convert that view to a normal Django view so it can use it as a view. And I'm going to give it a name of home. So this has created a new view for it. And I'm going to save that just to make sure everything is good. And I can just add a comma so we don't get some unexpected errors when we add another path. So the next thing that we want to do is to come into these URLs right here from our project, and I'm going to import include. And what I'm going to do before I even use include, I'm going to have to create an API authentication URL. So this is whenever we want to do some authentication, this is the URL, or this is the URL path it's going to use. So I'm going to say path, and what I'm just going to do is to say API-auth. I'm going to say slash, and then I want to include REST framework underscore framework dot URLs. So I want to include the REST framework dot URLs, but all of this has to be under quotes. And the next thing I want to do, that is done, but I also want to have a URL that specifies the home view. So as I said, it's good to have a basic knowledge of Django before following this video. So what I'm just going to do is that whenever a user wants to go into the home page, so let me explain why I'm setting this home page twice. I'm going to explain that in a minute. I'm just going to include API.urls. So why I'm setting this home page twice is because in here, right here, what I did was that I created the home page, but I created it under the app named API. And in Django, an app is kind of like a subset of a project. So when I make some changes to this app, or when I specify this URL to this app, I want to go to the main project and tell it that whenever a user tries to go to the home page, go into API, which is this app, and go into URLs, which is this file, and whatever is being done in a matching URL, which is this URL, that is what should be done. So then it's going to come here, then it's going to go into the home view, which is in views, and whatever is being done here is what is going to be done. So that is how to, take care of the URL linkings. So now what we would just want to do is to connect our database now. before we even do that, there seems to be an error here. So this should be URL patterns. So there should be no S there. And let's save that. So that should be working fine. And now what we want to do is to go back into Linode and check on the database. Now let's come back into Linode. So you can see now that the status says active. That means it has been created successfully. I'm just going to click on this. And now we can see all of the details that we need. Now the first thing the things I'm going to have to use in this for this particular video are all of this. So what I'm going to do, what Linode just did, it created like a Postgres database for us, and he hosted it already online, and it gives us the details, the connection details, so we can access this particular database on our computer or on whatever project we're working on. So I'm going to show you how to connect this to the Django app. So I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to go into settings.py. So in settings.py, I'm going to scroll all to where I see database. So right here where you see database, we just want to, first of all, we can copy this, but let's just comment this out. And let's create a new database. So we have database, we have default, all of this is correct. But for the engine should be django.db.backends.postgresql. So .postgresql. So that is that's the engine of the database that we're going to be using. So it's asking for the name. The name is Postgres. Although it doesn't show that here, but whenever Linode creates a new Postgres database, managed database for us, it automatically creates a database in it named Postgres. So I'm just going to say Postgres. And we're going to have these details. We need the user. We're going to say user. We're going to come back in here to fill in those details. We also need the password. I'm going to paste that in here. We're going to come back, and then we need the host, and one more thing that we need is the port. So Linode provides all this information for us. Now what we're going to do is to come into user. Right here in username, that is the user. We want to copy this user link Postgres, and we're just going to put quotes and paste that in there. For the password, we're just going to show this password, so we can copy it. We're going to click on copy, come back in here, do exactly the same thing and paste the password in it. For the host, this is the host right here. So the host that we're going to be using is this one, and not private network host, is this particular one right here that says, the first one that just says host. So we're going to copy that, and I'm going to bring it back in here, and we're going to paste that in there. And the last thing is the port. So the port is an integer value. It's not going to be in quotes like this. It's just going to be like this. So everything should be working successfully right now. We've been able to create this particular database. Now for us to check the database that we just created, what we're going to have to do is to migrate. So we're going to do something. I'm going to bring back this terminal, and I'm going to create a new terminal, and we're going to have to say python 3 manage.py make migrations. So this is something in Django that just allows us to, update any change that we've made to the database. But we've not made any change to the database. The only thing we did was just to connect to that database. Now we want to just migrate python 3 manage.py migrate everything that comes with Django, the user, database, every single thing. We want to migrate all those data and tables into this database that we just connected. Now once I hit enter, as you can see, everything is migrating successfully without any error. So you should see, boom, it has been migrated successfully. Now there are various ways you can check your database to see all the values in it. You can, get pgadmin and just connect this particular Postgres database, or we can just have the Django admin. So I'm going to quit this right here. So Django has something named the Django admin panel. So it's like this particular admin panel where you can see all the data you have in your database and every single thing. So to make it easier and quicker for you to just view your database, we're going to be using the Django admin panel. So let me show you how this is. You just need to come into Django and run your project again, but this time around go to /admin. Once you go to /admin, it's going to tell you to log in. Now this is just some default stuff that he puts there. It's not going to work because we haven't created any actual user on this our application. So what we're going to have to do is to run something in Python 3 manage.py create super user. So what this does is that it's going to create a new super user, and I'm just going to name it Tomi. And a super user is like a user that is authenticated to be able to view or log in to the admin panel. So we're just going to leave the email blank, and we're just going to put in password. It says the password is too common here. Let's just bypass that. So it has created that user, and now I'm going to log into this using that. As you can see, we have this basic data, and we have just the user data and groups data. The only data we have for user data is Tomi, which we just created right now. But what we want to do now is to create a new database, and this database is going to be called business. And as I said, it's going to have the name of the business and the amount of employees that work on that business or in that company. So let's do that real quick. The first thing I want to do is to come into, so we can close this now, and we want to come into models. So right here in models, what we just want to do is to make sure that we have a new model created. So we're going to say class business. It's going to take from models.model. So as I said, it is advisable to have some basic knowledge of Django so you can understand what I'm doing. So we're going to take models.model, and what we just want to do is to say name, which is, so what Django does, if you don't understand what this is, I'm basically creating a new database, but instead of using the traditional SQL route, I'm using OOP, which is classes in Python, to create this database. So this business is going to be the name of the database table, and this name is going to be like a field in that table. So I want to have a name, and I also want to have another field named number of employees. So number of employees is one of the fields that's going to be in the database. And what I'm just going to do, these are just the two I need, and I'm going to say models.character field. So this is how we specify different data types. So we're saying that this should be a character field. And whenever we specify character fields, we need to give you a maximum length. So we say max length. Let's just say like 1,000. That should be enough. And number of employees should be an integer field. So we're going to say models.integer field. We don't need to specify any parameter in this. We just need to give it that integer field. And let's just have a function on there that just returns. So we're going to say str. And what we just want to do is to return self.name. Just going to say return self.name. So what this is doing is that it's going to name every data by the name of the business. So that's what we're just doing right here. So we want to make sure that we have self in here. So that should work. Now what I'm going to do, as I said, whenever we make a change in this models.py file, we need to migrate it in here. So if I come in here and I hit refresh, we're not going to see this database that we just created named business. This is because we haven't pushed these changes into the main database. To do this, we're going to have to run this make migration that we ran before. So I'm going to say make migrations, and it shows me that I've created a new model named business, and now I'm going to have to migrate it. Boom, it has been migrated. Now you should think that it should automatically show here, since this is where we can see all the database. It is now present in the database, but we can't see it on the Django admin panel. This is because we haven't registered it. So we're going to have to come into this admin.py file. What we want to do is to import this particular business model from models.py. So we're going to say from, no, this is not URLs. We need to be in admin. So we say from .models import business. And we're going to say admin.site.register business. So what we're doing is that we are registering this business database or this business model on the admin site. So we should save that, come back in here and hit refresh. Now you can see that under our API app, we have a new database called businesses. So it automatically adds an S. We can change that, but that's not really necessary. So as you can see, it says business. Now we can just add, different values for this business. For example, I can just say one business, can be business one. And let's say it has 100 employees. Save and add another. Let's say add another business 2, and let's say they just have 12 employees. So I've saved that. Now we have two different data present on this business database, business 1 and business 2. Now we have all the data configured. The next thing we want to do is to now create an API that basically just returns a response given all the data we have in this database. So we want to have an API that just shows a list of businesses with the amount of employees that work under the business. So for us to do this, we already have this database that stores list of businesses and all the employees. Whenever a user tries to query this API that we want to create, we just want to return this particular business as a response, or this particular business database as a response. So let's do that. Now, for us to do this, we need to now use something called serializer. So I'm going to walk you through this step by step, and let's go. So the first thing we need to do is to come into the app, which is API, and we need to create a new file named serializers.py. So I'm going to say serializers.py. So we created a new file named serializers.py, and in here, this serializers basically allows us to parse our models in a way that can be turned into an API where a user can, send a request to that particular database. So what we're going to do now, we need to import two things. The first thing we want to import is serializers from the Django Rest Framework. So I'm going to say from Rest Framework, import serializers. And the next thing we want to import is the database which we want to be playing with. So the database in this instance is the business database. So we're going to say from .models import business. Now that we have that, we're going to create a new serializer class. We're going to say class, we're going to say business serializer, and we're just going to say serializers dot model serializer. So this is how we create a new serializer class in Django. And then what we just need to do is to say class, so just follow what I do, meta, and in here we want to specify the name of the model that's going to be in this serializer. So the name of the model is business, just going to paste that in there, and we want to specify the fields which we want to use. So what I mean is that whenever like a user someone tries to send a response, trying to send a request, unless they want to get a response or whatever we want to do with this model, what fields do we want to play with? What fields do we want to use? So those are the fields I want to put. So let's say we are like 10 different fields, and we just want to have this, just want to use this first two fields. That's when you're going to just put the two fields. But for this, we want to use all the fields. So I'm just going to put name and number of employee. So you're just going to say name and number of employee. So let's make sure that is in quotes, and that should do the work. So once you have that done, you have the serializer done, and the next thing that you just want to do is to come into the views. So I'm going to come into my views.py, and right here in this home view that we created, what I want to do now is to import this serializer right here. So I'm going to copy this business serializer, and I'm going to say from .serializer import business serializer, and I also want to import the model itself. So I'll say from .models import model of business. So now that I have these two imported, the next thing I want to do is to create a function under this class. So I'm going to say def, and I'm just going to say get. So now, as you know, in an API, there are 4 different methods we can do, but in this particular view, we just want to have a simple get response. So what we want to do is that whenever a user tries to send a request to this particular view, we just want to send them back a response. So what we're going to do in here, we need to have self as the argument. We're going to have request. We're going to have argument and keyword arguments. So args, shorten it to args, and this we need to have two, I'll say keyword arguments. So what we want to do now is to say QS equals, we want to say business.mode.objects.all. So what this is doing is that whenever we say the object.all, it means from this business model or this business database, get all the objects in it. So the object in this case is each of the database. So this is an object, this is an object that we created. So now we want to get all the objects or all the data in this particular business model, and they want to store it in QS. And now what we're just going to do is to say serializer. I'm going to come in here. I want to say equals business serializer. I'm going to say QS. So what we want to do is to get all the objects and add it to this business serializer. And then we want to say many equals true. So we have to specify the many parameter and give it true. And now what we just want to do is to send a response back. So remember when we imported response here, that's what we're going to use now. So what we're doing to do is to say return response. I'm going to say serializer, which is what we just created right here, dot data. So we're returning the data that we got from the serializer. Now let me walk through what we just did. What we just did was creating a serializer, and then we imported that serializer and the model of that serializer into the views. And in this home view that we created a function, a get function. So that means it just sends a response back to whoever sends a request to this particular view. And then we queried all the objects in this business model and stored it in like this QLs variable. And then we used the business serializer class in which we got, and we gave it all the query, which is all the response we got here, and said many equals true. And then we just returned a response of this serializer dot data. So the data we got from this serializer. Now let's try this out and let's see. Everything should be working. Let's make sure our project is running. If we come back here, good. Now if I come in here and try to run our project, boom, as you can see, everything is working successfully. We have this basic, API. So what this is, as you can see, we have this fancy look that we didn't design. So Django Rest Framework actually just gives us our API in this fancy look. But you can now see that if this is a get, method, and it says HTTP 200 OK, that means this works successfully. So whenever someone tries to send a request to this page, this is what they're going to get in JSON format. So they're going to get name, business 1, and number of employees, and business 2, number of employees. Okay, now let's come in here. So you're going to see that whenever we add the data in here, let's actually use something now, and let's just say CWT, which stands for code with Tomi, and let's just say number of employees is 1, and let's save it. Now we created this right here in our backend in our admin panel, but when we hit refresh, you can now see that it has been added to this particular response from the API. So this is a way we can build a basic API where someone can just get like a list of current information, right? So we've successfully built this API to this point. Now what we're going to do is to deploy this API onto Linode, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Now this project that we built, we want to deploy it onto the web. To do this, we're going to use Linode, and I'm going to walk you through all the steps. So I'm just going to close this terminal right here, and I'm going to come back into Linode. So this was the project we built. It's an API, and I want to deploy this API that I built onto Linode. So this API was built with Django and Django Rest Framework, and Linode has a one-click app on its marketplace. So if I come into the marketplace, it has a Django one-click app. So this allows it for me to work with Django easily on Linode due to the one-click app. So what I'm just going to do is to come under all apps, and you're going to see Django. So once you see Django on here, it's just going to take you through the setup. So what we're just going to do is to create a new Django user and all of that. So I'm going to walk you through all the steps right now. So I'm going to say Tomi. I'm going to say Tomi Toko. And it's going to ask for a password. So I can just give it a password. And it's going to ask for an email. So I'm just going to give it my email. and it's going to tell me to pick an image also. So right here, just that's the only image, so you can just pick that. That is good enough for what we need. And for the region, is advisable to pick the region closest to you, or you could just click on this speed test page to find the region that is best for your current location. So I'm just going to pick London, UK, and in here I'm going to come under shared GPU, and I'm just going to pick Linode 2. So this should be enough for what we need. It says it is 50 gig storage and 2 gig transfer, so and 2 gig RAM. This is more than enough for what we need. So down here, we're just going to leave this the way it is. And then this root password, we're going to need this root password because we're going to have to SSH into this particular cloud server that is going to create. So whatever password you're going to put in here, make sure you remember the password. So I'm going to type that. So that is my password that I'm going to use for this particular cloud. And right here, I'm just going to leave the rest the way it is. Leave this the way it is. And when we also come down here, you should just leave all of this and just click on create Linode. So it takes roughly about 1 to 2 minutes to create this particular Linode. So as you can see right here, it says that this is provisioning. Now it's going to take, as I said, roughly 1 to 2 minutes, sometimes quicker. And once that has done, I'm going to be back. So as you can see now, it says running. Now that everything has been created successfully, the first thing I want to do is to SSH into this particular server on my computer. So I'm going to copy this particular SSH access. He already told me how I can SSH into it. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to go into my terminal. So if you're on a Windows, just open your command prompt and make sure you are able to SSH into a server, a Linux server. And I'm on my Mac, and on my terminal, I am able to do that. So I'm just going to paste that particular command, and it asks me if I want to continue connecting. I'm just going to say yes. And it asks for the password. So remember when I said you need a password to SSH into it, that's the password you need to input right now. I'm just going to put my password, so it's invisible. Good. So now you can see that I am in this particular place right now. I'm in this particular Linux server right now. So I'm just going to be able to do everything I need to do. So let me quickly explain what just happened. So what Linode did was that it created a new cloud server, a new Linux server, and it like created a basic Django project for me in that server. So I'm going to show you everything it did in a sec. The first thing I want to do is to actually install Git in this server. So I'm going to be able to install Git by saying apt get install Git. So this is, so we just need to make sure everything is spelled correctly. So this is going to install Git for us. We're going to say yes, I want to continue, and that's going to install Git in a sec. Good, Git is installed. Now I'm going to walk you through what I want to do. So first of all, as I said, it created a Django project in this server, and what I want to do, I'm going to use GitHub to be able to deploy this particular project that I have right here. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that. First of all, I want to, go into this particular Django project, and I'm going to say cd. If I press ls, you're just going to see that it shows something blank, but I'm going to go into the root directory of this particular Django project. So what I'm going to do is to say cd space /var. So just follow the steps. Good. If I press ls, it shows that now I have Django App. So this is the Django App that Linode created for me automatically in this server. Now I want to go into Django App. If I press ls now, I should see manage.py, Django App, and SQLite database. So Django has created all of this for me as default. So now that I know that Django created all of this for me, so if I just come in here into this particular IP address, let me explain what this is. So this IP address is like the URL where our project is hosted on. So if I just copy this URL, I'm going to open an incognito window, and I'm just going to paste that URL. So it tells me that this site can't be reached. If I go to port 8000, which we know that that's the port that Django runs on, you can see that it shows me this basic Django project. So this is the Django project that we created. Now what we can do, we could just start developing on this Django project, or what we can do, since we already built our project on our computer, I could just push this code into this particular folder. I could replace it with this, and it's just going to deploy our project to the web on this particular IP address. Now let's do that. So what I'm going to do now is to come into GitHub, and I'm just going to go into GitHub, and I'm going to create a new repository right here, and I'm just going to name it business API. So that's the name of the repository, and I'm going to leave it public, and I'm going to create a repository. So boom, we have this blank repository. So what I can do is that I'm going to I'm going to initialize Git on this particular Django project. So let me just clear this real quick so it's going to be clean. So I'm going to initialize Git, and I'm going to push this Django project to this repository. And I'm just, now when I put the Django project to the repository, I'm going to be able to use like this VS Code that GitHub provides, this online VS Code that GitHub provides, to be able to like code in there or just push our own code in there. I'm going to show you what I mean. So the first thing I want to do is to first create an SSH key. So let me show you why I'm creating that. So first of all, I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to go into settings, open that in a new tab. So we should go under developer settings, and in here we want to say personal access token, and then just the normal token. I want to generate a new token, so I'm going to generate a new token for general use. So it's gonna tell me, to use all this basic stuff to authenticate. I'm just gonna use my password to authenticate, and I'm gonna click on confirm. So now that I'm able to use my password for this, I'm just gonna say API token, and I can just leave this expiry date as 30 days. And I want to select the scope. So this scope is what we can use this token to do, basically. So I want to be able to use it to control any repository. So once I click on repo, I don't really need the rest of this. I'm just going to click on create token. Now, once you have this token, make sure you copy it before leaving this page, because if you don't copy it, your GitHub is not going to show you that token again. So you're going to have to create a whole new token again. So just make sure you have that copied before quitting this page. And now that we have that, the next thing we want to do is to now push this code, as I said, into this particular GitHub repo. So to do this, I'm just going to initialize all of this. So I'm first going to initialize, add readme, and do all of this. I can just copy all of this particular code, and I'm going to paste it in here. So it says main does not match any. So, okay, so right here is, okay, cool. So what we need to do is to make sure that we say git add. Now, once we have git add, then we can run git commit. Yeah, good. And then we can run branch to the main and add. Yeah, it says it already exists because it already exists. And now we want to push it. So now we ask for my username. I'm going to say Tomi Toko, and it asks for the password. So this password is not actually your GitHub password, but it is the SSH key that we created right here. So you want to copy that, and then you want to come back in here and paste that in there and hit enter. Boom, as you can see, everything has been pushed. If I come in here, let me just open that in a new tab. You can now see that we have everything pushed right here. So we just created all of this. So the basic Django app, or the simple Django app that Linode created, is what we have in this repository right now. So I'm going to show you a way that we can have VS Code online on this repository. Just copy this, or just open it in a new tab. And what you can just do is to change .com to .dev. So GitHub added this particular feature where we can open like a VS Code environment for a GitHub repository. So it's this GitHub repo named business API, but it's going to open up all the files and everything like we're actually on VS Code. So as you can see, it opens up all of this like we're on VS Code, which is good. So now I could just start coding into this, instead of building it from my computer, I could just do everything here. But since I already built it on my computer, I'm just going to push my computer code or my source code, which is this right here. I'm going to push all of this in here, right? And then I'm just going to save that, and that is automatically going to be affected to this one. It's going to replace all of this code. So let's just do that. So the first thing I want to do is to just select all of this, and I'm just going to delete this because we don't really need this. I'm going to delete all of this, And what I'm going to do is to push all of this code into this particular repo. So what we just need to do is to drag this. I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it, and I'm just going to paste that in there. So that is going to drag everything and paste it in here. So we basically pushed this code in here. So all the configuration, everything that we've been building is now on this particular repo. And before I sync it and commit this and push it to the main repository, I'm going to come into business API and go into settings.py. So in here where we have allowed host, what I want to do is to allow this particular host, which is this particular Django one-click app that we created. I want to allow the IP address for this particular project. So right here where we have allowed host, I'm just going to put this in there, and that should save. And what I'm going to do is to just come in here and click on sync. So I just want to sync this. And then what I want to do is to come back in here into source control. And I'm just going to give you, like, let's say final code. And I'm going to commit and push. So now it's going to push this onto the main repo, and that should have been pushed successfully. Now if I come back in here and hit refresh, you can now see that we have this business API source code, which is good. We didn't really need to do most of the stuff from the terminal. We just drag and drop our source code onto this repo, which is very good. So now the next thing that we want to do is to now pull this source code. We want to pull the source code into this terminal. First of all, let me clear this. We want to pull it back. So if I click on ls, we still have the initial code that Linode created, but we want to pull our own code in here. So what I'm just going to do is to say git pull. And when I just say git pull, it's basically going to pull everything. And now when I say ls, it replaces all the code that was in this particular folder before with the new code that we just pushed. So now that we know we have that, let's clear this again. What we just need to do now, let's test it. So I'm going to run this project by saying python 3 manage.py run server. But now, instead of just running server, because if I click on run server, it's going to run it on the normal Django port. But I want to run it on this port, which was given to us by Linode. So I'm going to click on the IP address again. And I want to say port 8000. Enter. So it gives us an error saying Django Rest Framework is not installed. So let's just cut out of this and install it ourselves. And we're just going to say pip3 install Django Rest Framework. And that should install Django Rest Framework. Good. And now we can run that again. And it says it doesn't have psycop2. So psycop2 is kind of like the module that Django uses to connect Postgres. Remember, we created a Postgres database on Linode. So that is the module that Django uses to connect Postgres with our own app. So I'm going to cut out of this and just pip3 install psycop2. So we're just going to wait for that to install. So it didn't install. So we just need to run this first of all. And once we run that, then we can pip3 install psycop2. And that is going to make sure that psycop2 installs. And we're going to give it a second to install. As you can see, it has successfully installed psycop2. Now what we can do is to run our project. But before we run it, we need to come into our cloud. And what we just need to do is to copy this particular IP address. So remember when we created this particular, so if I come into database and I open it in a new tab. So remember when we created this database, we gave it like an IP address that can be able to access it. And we only gave it our IP address. So what we need to do now is to come into settings and click on manage access control. We want to paste the IP address of this particular Linux server so that this Linux server can also access it, and click on update access controls. So once that is done, this Linux server will be able to connect to that database. So once that is done, what we just need to do is to re-SSH into this server because I SSH'd out of it. So to do that, we just copy this code, run it, and it asks for the password. We just input the password, and now we are in. So I'm just going to go into var. We're going to say /var/www. And I'm going to go into Django App. And once we say ls, we should have our project. Now let's say Python 3 manage.py run server, and we want to run it on port 8000. So as you can see, it has this SSH root. We want to remove all of this, just the IP address. Now you can see that it says it is running on this particular server. So we can just copy it, and we can come into the incognito tab and paste it. Boom. As you can see, we now have our API application being deployed using Linode. Now this is very good. This is all what we wanted, and we've been able to achieve this. So we can see it in a JSON response. So if someone actually queries or send a request to this particular API, this is the response they will get. So as you can see, everything is working up to this point. But there's one more thing. So if I come back in here and I cut out of this server, if I come back here and hit refresh, you're going to see that it's not even going to load. As you can see, it's taking a lot of time to load. But when it actually loads, it's not going to load up. This is because this only runs whenever we run Python 3 manage.py run server. But that is not what we want. We want it to run even when we SSH out of this server. When I even close my laptop, I still want my application to be running. To do this is very easy. What I just need to do is to run the same particular command, but at the end, I want to add this and. So we want to add and in here. And at the beginning, we want to add no up. Now this no up, it just allows our application to keep running even when we close it. So no up with a P. So as you can see, that is there running. It's running in the background, but once I come back in here, now you can see that the application is still running. So this is how you can deploy and host your API using Linode. So it's a very basic and straightforward way to build an API and deploy it on Linode. So that's going to be all for this video. Thanks for watching to the end of this video, and I hope you enjoyed everything we did in this video. And if you want us to cover any other topic, please drop a comment in the comment section or what topic you want us to cover next. And having that said, thanks once again for watching, and bye for now.